Hello, my name is Olurotimi. I like to talk about American history and world history, and I talk about the law and international law as well, human rights, international human rights law. However, whatever I say is not legal advice, and I'm not licensed to practice law. I do have a law degree, a Juris Doctor degree from George Washington University Law School. What it means is I can call myself a lawyer, right? So, but I do not practice law, and I'm not an attorney because an attorney in America is one who is licensed to practice law, right? Anyway, I'll put that aside. Today, I want to continue my discussion on the corruption in the state attorney's office in Montgomery County, Maryland, and how they co-opt the office of the public defender to sabotage blacks, and they have a racket right in Montgomery County. Apparently, when I was wrongfully detained based on false trumped up charges, I used the opportunity to do some investigative journalism, interview and ask questions of some of the inmates. And I saw this as sort of a pattern. It's a practice, a corrupt practice in Montgomery County, Maryland, in which police officers file false charges against black people and lock them up, make conditions very difficult for them, right, in Montgomery County, Maryland. And then the state attorney, knowing that false charges have been filed, then coerce the indigent black people to either to accept wrongful plea bargains, which includes forcing them, coerce them to take medication, even though they don't. These black people don't have a mental illness. They coerce them. There have been instances where it's led to suicides, deaths in while the black inmates have been detained without trial, right? So there have been instances where this occurred while I was wrongfully detained between December 2024 and January 2025. About four people, at least four people died. Three from drug overdose, one from suicide by hanging in the Montgomery County Correctional Facility in Clarksburg in Maryland. It's in Boyd's in Maryland. However, today I'm continuing with my discussion on how, specifically with respect to me, the Office of the Public Defender in Montgomery County was committing attorney misconduct and allowing itself to be co-opted by the state attorney's office and a corrupt judge, Judge James Bonifant, the circuit administrative judge, who had a conflict of interest and had been manipulating the whole case in favor of the police. I've done videos explaining how I got to be wrongfully charged. So, in any event, so the case had been, there were wrongful charges, and I'm going to do a video explaining prosecutorial misconduct. So it's the police may decide to file initial charges and uh, may decide to arrest someone, but it's the prosecutor who reviews the evidence and decides to maintain charges, and they can withdraw those charges. But even if there are charges filed against anybody, rightfully or wrongly, right? Um, in America, it's our constitutional right to have our day in court. That's the Sixth Amendment, right? The Sixth Amendment, you should know your charges, get, and then you have a right to a fair and speedy trial, uh, a public trial, and before a jury, right? Before a jury, as they say, a jury of your peers. So, and you have the right to obtain witnesses and a means to, compel these witnesses to appear in your favor and to cross-examine witnesses, your accusers. These are all your rights, right? You have a right to cross-examine, to question your accusers in court, a trial. So I've talked about how in earlier videos I've talked about how the case kept on being postponed. False competency evaluations were ordered using falsified information, And the judge, in order to try and coerce me to take a wrongful plea bargain, which I refused, was trying to coerce me and ordering false incompetency to stand trial orders, right? He was saying that he was finding me incompetent wrongfully, right? He did this twice. But in any event, I was cleared on both occasions without having to take treatment. And in both instances, the state psychiatrists were saying told the judge that no, I don't have a mental illness and I don't require any treatment. And they, in the hospital, they apologized to me, saying, well, this was wrong. They hope I get justice. So it's a pattern of corrupt practices by Judge James Bonifant. He just, you know, ostensibly retired on March 13, 2026. The case should have been dismissed, but apparently he's been protecting the corrupt cops, right? So, in any event, these charges against me, um, we've reviewed the evidence, right? The evidence is insufficient. The public defender said no, that they don't have sufficient evidence. She said, well, that because they didn't have an arrest warrant, I was in my home, right? All the testimony, everything that was used to bring them to my home, including a perjured and fabricated emergency evaluation petition, it's all been discredited. So initially, she said she was going to file um, a motion to suppress the evidence, right? And so because it was inadmissible, because it's based on false testimony, that's inadmissible evidence in court. So once they suppressed, the case would have been dismissed. Just a few days before December 12th, 2025, when the motion was due, when the hearing motion was scheduled, she changes her mind and says she's going to ask the prosecutor to just dismiss the charges. Later on, she comes back to me and says the prosecutor refused, and then she's suggesting to me that's from the prosecutor's office. They keep offering me a plea bargain. One of them was that I return back to Nigeria, right? I'm originally from Nigeria, that I return back to Nigeria and never come back to America. And then they dismiss the charges. And that if I come back to America, then they bring up the charges again, right? Um, Two things where that fails, right? In fact, three instances. First of all, I'm innocent, right? And I, uh, given the failure of the state, the public defender, the judge to dismiss the charges, right? At least I get my shot uh, at trial in court. So I have to present evidence, and that's what I'm looking for. I was looking forward to demonstrate my innocence. I'd waited. It's been 3 years, right? So that's one. Secondly, I'm an American citizen, right? Being an American citizen, I have a right to live in America, right? I don't have a federal case. I don't have an immigration case. I don't have any problem with immigration. That's not, and Montgomery County has no jurisdiction with regard to my immigration status or my citizen. I'm an American citizen, right? In the 14th Amendment, right? No state shall abridge my, privileges and immunities, as an American citizen. By them asking me to go back to Nigeria, right, based on trumped up charges, even if the charges, based on trumped up charges, and that I never return to America, right, they are violating my 14th Amendment rights, right? Those are violating my constitutional rights. Obviously, I didn't accept that. And by the way, why if Montgomery County, why did they say, well, okay, then don't come back to Montgomery County, right? Or don't come back to the state of Maryland. Because I'm an American citizen, I can live anywhere I want to, right? But it's bizarre and it just harks back to something that happened under President Herbert Hoover during the Great Depression. And in order to create vacancies, because 25% of America was unemployed. In some places, like in Ohio, some towns in Ohio, cities in Ohio, there was an 80% unemployment rate. So President Hoover and his administration figured that if they um, could get minorities, in this case Mexican Americans, who had held a lot of the jobs, if they could get them uh, to leave America, it would leave uh, job openings, and white men could do those jobs. So the federal government pressured, uh, local and state government agencies to arrest Mexican Americans on flimsy charges, to just arrest them, round them up, and put pressure on them, antagonize them, make life unlivable for them, so that they couldn't earn a living if they're locked up in jail and things like that, and got them to offer them one-way tickets to return to Mexico. Many of them had never been to Mexico; they were born in America, but back then it did the trick, and so that it's called the Mexican repatriation. Over 300,000, between roughly 300,000 to 1.2 million Mexican Americans, the people who were born here, right, were forced to go to Mexico, and after the state governments harassed them, filed false charges, law enforcement in local governments filed false charges against them, harassed them, sending them back. So this is the sort of harassment that I'm sort of getting. And I've given the reason why this is happening, but I'm just showing how the Office of Public Defender does not faithfully represent, the defendants, indigent defendants in Montgomery County, Maryland, and they sabotage their cases, because apparently the Office of Public Defender is an appendage of the state attorney's office, right? So, of course, I refused that because when I'm an American citizen, that's not going to work. Then the other thing is, all charges in America, they have a termination, right? There's a statute of limitation, especially these are misdemeanors. There's certain things that, well, there are no statute of limitations, right? Like murder, right? Things like that. Murder. Those are rare, but most charges, especially all misdemeanors, in this case, these are all misdemeanors, right? They have a statute of limitation, so that if the state does not prosecute them, there's something called failure to prosecute. If they do not prosecute over a certain time, they just lapse, they expire, they are dismissed. They have to be automatically dropped by the state, or the defendant, the attorney for the defendant files a motion, and the charges are dismissed for failure to prosecute, and then violation of statute of limitations, right? So in this case, again, I've done a video, and I'm going to do another one explaining the Hicks rule. In Maryland, there's a law that requires charges filed against a defendant, right, to go to trial within 180 days, or it violates the Hicks rule and the right of the defendant to a speedy trial. So I'm going to do a video and discuss cases explaining concerning the Hicks rule. So I refused that. Then she came at me again that, well, that they offered to drop all the assault charges and the intent to injure with a dangerous weapon, but asked me to just plead guilty to reckless endangerment, right? I said, no, I'm not guilty of anything. That's no good either. And she suggested again, brought up, well, what about just pleading guilty to disorderly conduct? I said, no. So even though my attorney knows that I'm an innocent person, so it's her responsibility to file a motion before the judge or an evidentiary hearing and say, no, they don't have sufficient evidence to be able to convict me, and so these charges should be dismissed. And they've used false testimony, fabricated testimony, perverting the proper functioning of the courts and violating my constitutional rights. So the charges should move forward. They're wrongfully filed charges, and they should be dismissed. But she's being strong-armed. The Office of the Public Defender works in cahoots with the state attorney's office, and if they have a circuit administrative judge that's been bribed, right, like Judge James Bonifant, who receives money, kickbacks wrongfully, right, I've talked about how he was on the board of MedStar Hospital. That's the hospital the police took me to. The police then used then that hospital then fabricated um, a diagnosis without consent from me or my family, without an evaluation. But the police had gone to write a fabrication, a false testimony. And so they used that. And the judge Bonifant is on the board of that hospital, MedStar Hospital, right? And so his job had been to try and coerce me to take treatment to discredit me and to end the case. And I refused based on my constitutional rights. So we've gone beyond that now. And so I'm supposed to have my day at trial. It was February the 2nd, 2026, 7 days before trial. The trial was February 9, 2026 at last, right? So I'd already provided a list of witnesses to be subpoenaed because when you go to trial, if you're going to go before a jury, which is what she suggested, she said the prosecutor refused to dismiss the charges as she can't force him. And then she disingenuously says that, well, there's no motion to dismiss for insufficient evidence. No, there's motion to dismiss for many things, including bad faith prosecution, a vindictive prosecution, right? She could have suppressed evidence. She didn't do any of those things. So she said, we'll get she'll get a judgment of acquittal, right? So that means we are going before the jury. Well, we have to prove our case to the jury with evidence, right? We need evidence. Now, she had never conducted an investigation. The public defender's office, is run by the state attorney. It's run by under the attorney general's office. Their duty, their responsibilities to protect the defendant, right? The indigent defendant, and they can conduct investigations. Now, the alleged crimes occurred in my home. I was the one who was a victim of a crime, right? But the police now, as alibi to defend their assault on me and misconduct, they falsified a charge statement claiming I assaulted them, right? Uh, there's no evidence on this, just a false testimony that they used. The body cam shows that that's false, right? That they lied. But the thing is, I'd requested um, that the my attorney, the public defender, obtain evidence from the crime scene, uh, check my food, see how I was drugged, because this is something I had said. So this whole thing had been orchestrated a long time. I suspect by the Department of the Navy and the Department of Defense. In fact, um, I have evidence of this, right? Because I've been threatened the day before. As of the day I was assaulted and invaded through a swatting in my home, I had been threatened the day before. As of that day, I was an auditor in the Department of the Navy, and I had been threatened the day before at the gym. I told my public defenders, go to the gym I went to, obtain the CCTV, the cameras, their witnesses, interview people, do all of that. They did nothing. They never went to my building where I lived. They never interviewed anybody. I had people who living on the floor who were willing to be witnesses that they recorded what happened. She never subpoenaed anybody. Instead, she now is trying to persuade me a week before trial that, hey, the police didn't know. She was basically trying to talk to me that, hey, I should let the police off. I'm the one who's been accused of a crime. And she's basically asking me to let the police off because the police didn't know. She was now a new story entirely. She was telling me the police had no idea that there was an outstanding emergency evaluation petition against me, which was fabricated. We proved that, right? So with the fabricated it shows, they didn't have a case. So she was now saying, well, the police just came randomly that they didn't know. And I should try and hide, we should conceal this evidence that exculpates me, right? The mitigating evidence that exonerates me, right? Uh, on behalf of the police. Now, so basically, is she throwing me under the bus? Well, I don't know entirely. What you're saying is what she's going to do is, without evidence, without bringing evidence to support our statements. Um, she's just going to go into trial and show the defendant that there's no evidence. I don't satisfy the elements of an intent to frighten assault. That I didn't intend to frighten the police, because as intent to frighten is a form of assault. That apparently that's the thing that they're charging me with. That even though they hadn't specified the modality, the form of the assault, they were saying they failed to provide us a bill of particulars to specify what type of assault they were talking about. But she was just going to go in and say, look, based on this evidence, this person didn't commit any assault, and she felt that, well, I'll be acquitted based on that. But she was trying to um, implore me that I shouldn't show the evidence of the police misconduct. Her rationale was that, well, Montgomery County jury, right? They tend to have a high opinion of law enforcement, and painting law enforcement in a bad light, as she put it, would make would create disfavor, right? Disfavor amongst the jury, right? Um, so she's saying, so even though I was a villain of police misconduct, she's saying that there's a biased jury there already, right? Um, and I shouldn't show how their favorite cops, these cops that this biased jury loves so much, I shouldn't show how they're evil, or how they harmed me, how they're crooked, and the wrongdoing that they did. So, including the telling of lies, right? So basically, she's asking me to walk myself into the snare, into the snare they set for me, fall into the pit they dug for me, because the police are the ones who falsified evidence, they fabricated evidence, they lied. So, and she hasn't had this evidence thrown out. She didn't suppress it. So she's also asking that, well, I shouldn't say that we shouldn't provide evidence that the police lied, that they committed any form of misconduct, because she's saying that Montgomery County, is made up of impartial juries, right? Impartial community of that will only constitute an impartial jury that has a bias favoring the cops, law enforcement. So under the Sixth Amendment, I actually have a right to an impartial jury. So she could have asked, I asked her, then ask for a change of venue, because that's a basis for having a change of venue. Um, in any event, after she'd been struck, her appearance had been struck, I requested a change of venue. But guess who decided it? The judge that I'd filed a judicial misconduct against, who's been biased all the while, Judge James Bonifant, rejected it. So I'm basically walking into the snare of Montgomery County, right? And my public defender that's meant to protect me is walking me, saying, okay, I should just walk into this snare, this trap of Montgomery County police officers, and the state attorney, and the circuit administrative judge. So you see how many black people are wrongfully convicted, take bad plea bargains, in in Montgomery County, and they end up, with these terrible criminal records. And this was what um, my public defender was trying to do to me. So, um, because when you at trial, what happens is the jury doesn't know you, right? The jury is going to just examine the evidence presented before them. Now, given my attorney never requested that evidence should be suppressed, then it's fair game. The police are going to continue to present that false evidence, the false testimony. So when the police gives that false testimony, the lies that they put in the charge statement, and they repeat it at trial, right? And then my attorney comes and says, no, that they lied. We have no evidence, right? They're going to believe the testimony of the police, because I'm going to be saying they lied. And obviously, the police are going to be saying, no, I'm the one who's lying. But we had an opportunity at hearing during motions to suppress that false evidence. But my attorney never did. So if the it doesn't matter that even if they can show, right, from the body cam that no assault occurred, juries have used false testimony, right, false testimony to convict defendants. Lots of time in American history, in the history of uh, American legal system, especially when the defendant is a black person. And then the accusers, right, the plaintiffs, they're white. The victims, alleged victims, the cops, these are white people, a white man, white woman, and one black man the one who falsified the charge statement has an affinity with the Department of Defense and Department of the Navy. So I've done videos explaining how this frame up, the setup, was actually to obstruct justice. It was done in concert with Department of Defense and Department of Navy officials. Um, now, so in the DoD, one of the people that was trying to resolve the uh, case I filed against Kirsten Risbeck, the official who had well, approval authority or whatever rights, and was asking me to resign, voluntarily resign, and they'll give me $5,000. The person is actually an ex-CIA executive, a senior executive in the CIA, had done over 20 years, right? And her name is Dr. Mary C. Byers, right? So, and I was supporting I was not a member of the intelligence community, but I was doing work supporting what I understand is members of the intelligence community, an agency that's in the intelligence community. So, and I was saying people associated with them had committed fraud, right? So these people have access to higher ups to frame me, whether members of the intelligence community, to set all these things up to sabotage me. It's unclear, but I have that's where the investigation should have been done uh, by Montgomery County, the state of Maryland. None of this has been done. Instead, they're throwing me under the bus. That's my public defender is throwing me under the bus. The state filed false charges against me, and it's an injustice, a perversion of justice, and it's astonishing. So um, of course, I then I went before the judge saying, no, I want a different attorney because if I go forth with this person, a trial, I shouldn't be surprised if I end up being convicted for something I haven't done. It's a reason I did videos explaining the lynching, the wrongful conviction, and then the eventual lynching of Leo Frank. Leo Frank was a Jewish man, a wealthy Jewish man, Ivy League educated, who was wrongfully convicted based on false testimony, right? The false testimony of a black man in the South that was very anti Semitic at that time. And they convicted an innocent man based on using false testimony, right? There was no evidence supporting the fact that he committed this crime, but he was convicted based on lies. Even though he gave his own testimony and he was an upstanding member of the society, he was still convicted, right? So Maryland is still the South. And according to the public defender, she's saying, well, the jury are biased. They favor their cops. And I know their cops lie. She knows that the cops lied because she's looked at the evidence. There's inconsistencies in the statements. My attorney stood up in court, told the judge, well, the cops distort, there are distortions, significant distortions, uh, uh, and incongruence between the the charge statements of the police officer Demarcus Coleman and the body cam evidence. That's a body camera evidence, right? That's a euphemism and a polite way to say the police is lying, right? So the judge knew, the state attorney knows, my public defender knows, but it's still going to trial. They're still taking that evidence. So once my attorney didn't request for the false testimony, the fabricated evidence, or the case to be dismissed. Once it gets to trial, the the uh, the alleged victims, the cops, they're going to present it again. that false testimony. So just based on a false narrative, they're going to say it again, and the jury are just going to say no, that these are cops, upstanding people. That if they're lying, my attorney should have had that dismissed and suppressed, but it wasn't. They have to believe them, so they can get a conviction of an innocent man, right, by crooked cops just lying because my public defender didn't do their job. They did not have they didn't go to a judge and show that, well, uh, the the police lied, the testimonies as a fabrication, that there's been fraud upon the court, have this case dismissed or suppress the evidence, right? The false evidence, investigate the scene, provide alternatives of what happened. She's done none of that. None of that. She's walking me into a conviction. And this is an example of how Montgomery County Police public defenders have been sabotaging black people. And that's why Maryland has the highest, worst incarceration rates of black men in America, right? Anyway, I'll stop this video here and I'll do other videos explaining probable cause. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.